Hello, students. This is our first video lecture for EDIT5028. So you'll watch this lecture, it'll pause and ask you to answer some questions as we go. So please do so. That helps me understand how well you're understanding things. And it also helps to help you pay attention. So you're welcome to watch this in double speed or whatever you need to, as long as you're getting the information you need. So we're going to talk about design and studio because those are two core elements about what we're going to be doing in this class. And so let's start with design. Ultimately, design is about the particular. I want you to think about what that word particular means and go ahead and write that. I'm really curious what you think about that. Write that in the response. Okay, so another definition of design is that it is a structure adapted to a purpose. That purpose could be thought of as that particular. What is the specific particular purpose that it is for? So, for example, if we look at these doorknobs, they all have the same basic function. They open a door, but they're still different. One of them does not have a lock, so its purpose must be on a door that doesn't need a lock. Or one of them's kind of fancy looking, but it doesn't have a very high security lock. So it was maybe for a time where people didn't pick locks as well. I'm not really sure. Or maybe it's just a door that doesn't need as specific as a lock for. And so these are each structures, they're doorknobs adapted to the purpose. So there's these design scholars, their names are Eric Stadelman and I just forgot his first name. Nilsson is his last name. It'll come to me later. But they emphasize this part of design. So one way to think about it is to start with the universal and true. That's when we have a scientific concept that we believe is going to hold true across all contexts. So there might be a concept of physics or something from the learning sciences, a learning theory that we believe is going to be consistent no matter what. But design is a little bit different because they use the universal and true, but they use that to apply to the particular and the real, like this doorknob, which is one of many possibilities for a doorknob. The designer has to create something that fits that specific particular purpose. And then when they talk about the ultimate particular, what they mean is even if you had this exact same like model of doorknob that you would buy at Home Depot, I doubt you could buy this doorknob at Home Depot, but the way it's placed on different doors is going to be different. A different particular is going to be an ultimate particular on this door versus this door. It plays a slightly different function in the world. Excuse me. And so they said, Nilsson Stolderman said that design is a process of moving from the universal in general, that big theory, to the particular, and then ultimately to our ultimate particular, the specific design. And so this makes what design knowledge is, what it means to design something, a little bit different from learning other things. So, for example, this first one, design is about taking general knowledge and then moving it towards a specific context or the particular. Now, some people will actually disagree with that. They're saying that actually we should be creating a theory within the particular instead of going back and forth. It's really a moot point as far as I am concerned, but it's just that understanding that we're going to use general theories, learning theories, but what we have to learn to do is how to apply them to design for learning to support learners. Another thing about design is it's about seeing things in certain ways. Since there's a lot of different possibilities, it's about trying to see it in a way that's going to make it effective. Design knowledge is a lot about the design process and learning what that design process is. And then there's these things called design principles, and they can provide guidance to us, but they're not like an absolute truth. They're not a universal and true. For example, there's some rules about when you center text and when you left align text. That is a really good guideline that in most cases you could follow, but there might actually be circumstances where you wouldn't follow that rule. And so design is about learning the principles, but also learning when to use them and when not to use them. Sorry, my neighbor's being very noisy today. All right. So, given the fact that there are a lot of this design knowledge is different from other types of knowledge, learning to design takes on a little bit of a different character than maybe other types of learning. So, this is what's called a design studio. It's an open space. It started in architecture a long time ago, and it's the core pedagogical methods that most design schools, including instructional designers, use, or at least they use some element or variation. So it's called the design studio. So the traditional design studio, we have some authentic projects, something real we're working on. We work on it in some shared physical space so we can see what each other are doing. Usually there's extended class time for the work. And then it goes through this process of creating or proposing something, getting critique or feedback, and then iterating on it. So this is the traditional, and we'll do things a little different in this course, but just to understand how this works together, because it's an interesting case of learning design as well, I think, how we help people learn. I actually was able to research an architecture studio course at Arizona State University. I spent about 8 hours a week in their studio filming stuff and things. And the students were probably even in there quite a bit longer than that. But I have some different videos that kind of show what this means to learn to design. And I'm going to share some. They're a little bit noisy because it was a noisy classroom, but I think you can still get the basic idea. So remember when we talked about design is learning to see as something. This is something called a desk crit. So it's when a student is working usually one-on-one with a professor or professional, and the professor is guiding them and trying to help them understand how to design differently. So we're going to watch this brief clip about this professor. He's actually a pretty famous architect named Michael Rotundi, and he's going to help the student see the design space differently.
Or how would you make that if you thought of it as a village rather than a building? Like I was just looking at that and I'm thinking, what if those three, you have this, this, and that. Yes. And as soon as you connect them, that's a building. But if you don't connect them, then these are, say, conceptually discrete buildings. Then you're basically shaping that space, which is what you're doing with that anyway. But that's going to be an atrium as opposed to the town square or the village, the village green.
So you see how he kind of looks at what she's doing and helps her see it differently. He's like, what if we look at it as a village green where we're looking at the shaping space instead of focusing on the buildings? Okay, so here's another one. And this one, I want you to look at all the different types of stuff that's out on the desk. So she's got this collage thing. She has these wooden circle things, these 3D models. And they're going to use these models to help design and come up with ideas. And so this architect, Max, he is helping her learn about design processes. So remember, that's something we learn in design is the process. And he's going to talk about how to use these different representations or tools in her design process.
Makes sense. I just
Right. So I'm trying to find a way out of the overwhelmingness of it. And part of it is take everything that's in your brain and allow that to kind of storyboard these moments out. Okay. Some designers use a stack of white 3x5 cards.
Right.
Because they're not precious. Like if I draw in your sketchbook, it's precious.
Look at my drawings.
It's fine. Right. They're fine because you're catching the essence of what you're thinking. True?
Yes, true.
Okay. So, I mean, part of it is you want to make things instinctively, like you made this collage. And then in this kind of post-analyzation, then maybe you do the things that are in your mind that this generated on your cards, these kind of annotated sketches. Then you sort of set the whole thing away, and then you make another thing. And when you make the next thing, you're synthesizing between this and those.
Okay, so you see that use of different materials that process of just making a lot of stuff. And I'm going to talk about this more in another video on our signature assignment, but I like that example of how the professor is helping the student learn to design. So this is what's called a midterm crit. And what happens here is the student, this is the same student as the previous video, they bring their work and they present it to others and get feedback. And in this case, they have some architects and actually someone who's not an architect that are from externally. Sometimes they even fly them in from different states and they help give the student feedback. So I'm just going to show a couple brief clips of this. So it starts with the student explaining her project.
That. And then I started to correlate them to actual architectural ideas and actual programmatic elements. So shorelines representing this idea of an edge condition.
Here's
one of the things I took from there that that's coming through in this is it was a lot of open spaces, and you had a lot of viewpoints to see multiple things at one time from whatever space you're in, and that's something that I really clung to and that I think that I'm using in this.
You're saying, like, through that middle atrium space, you're able to just kind of cross.
Yeah.
Because I think that's something like what you just brought up about the Nice project, and then your study of the oceans is something that sectionally there's a lot more opportunity. Like just the idea of the ocean as being this like fluid this space that up and down and left and right, it's all things can be all around you. And so I guess the thing that I mean, and you touched on this a little bit, is like the quality of light and the lightness of things versus the heaviness of things.
So that gives you a basic idea of just how this external critic is working with the student to develop ideas. Our midterm crits, we're going to be more focused on peer feedback, but just to give you an idea of what this type of learning might be like. Okay, so final thing, I want you to think about, we're going to have to do this stuff online. What do you think some affordances or maybe some advantages for doing this type of learning online, and what limitations do you see? There are a lot of people who do this online. So I want you to write, what do you think some affordances and limitations are? And then also write, do you have any ideas for how we can make this effective? We're actually designing our own learning experiences. This U group of students, summer 2021, ULM online learning, we're designing this course for our particular purposes. And so we want to do what we need to adapt our learning environment to that purpose, to the needs we have. So I'd love to hear your ideas. And then make sure to watch the video on the signature assignment, because it goes into a little more detail about the idea of affordances in design and what that has to do with your project. Thanks for listening.